I recently returned from a 3-day conference in Memphis, Tennessee that was hosted by the Community Leaders Institute. The conference was called CLIX, CLIX, and it was really, really interesting. I have always loved being social and building people around a common passion or cause. I was blown away by the fact that being a community leader, like for a brand, for a business, for an organization, is a field. Like, that is a job. That isn't just, a subheading under marketing. Community as a industry is something that a ton of people are really focusing on right now for their brands, for their businesses, for their causes, their thought leadership, and building communities is something that is on the mind of a lot of huge companies. That's a huge thing that I learned while I was sitting and being educated by all these people who have been in the industry for years and years and years. I found it fascinating because to me, social marketing is, and kind of always has been, for my brand, at least for Bad Axe, it has always been something that I've likened it to building a community, and I have only recently started proactively building out a community surrounding my brand. So some of the key takeaways that I had, not only from the conference, but from a little over a year in being a new community builder for a client's brand that I'm now a co-founder of, as well as for my own brand, there's some things that I have learned and wish I knew in advance of starting communities. So let's break those down. The first one is knowing why you're building a community. Why do you even want to do it? Not just because it's a rising industry or a hot buzzword, or it seems like a marketing tactic that would be beneficial for your brand. It's a lot of work, right? So the passion and the why behind it, and the why is going to be an attractant for your potential community members. Maybe that why is related to internal needs, right? Product development, research, feedback, those types of things can be really useful to build a community around. Maybe it's more external facing, or not necessarily as research based, but more about developing passion or encouraging people to change habits or engage in certain activities. So I see that a lot in some of the case studies that were shared at the conference last week about passion communities, right? So communities where, you and other people are engaging in celebrations of something you're passionate about. I've taken part in communities that are passion-based many times. I think all of us probably have, either with or without realizing it. Hobby groups of friends that are really into a certain TV show or movie or film or music or anything like that is something that you are excited about, and you kind of form a little group around celebrating that thing. Those types of communities make a lot of sense. Like, the why is to be excited about that thing, right? So for example, I once upon a time had a podcast with a friend about knitting. And our whole thing that we were building out unintentionally was we wanted to hang and talk about yarn. But there were other people that kind of came along that journey, and they were then passionate about similar things that we were, right? They were already passionate about the fiber arts. But patterns that we were working on the podcast, these viewers started working on too. And we kind of had this little community of we're all working on the same project together. Not like we set it up intentionally, but it became the why for the group. Let's knit together, let's work on similar things, let's problem solve about patterns we're working on, whatever. So that became the why. So knowing that in advance would have changed how we probably structured that podcast. And knowing the why that's going to be attractive for people is going to help build out what matters within the community. The second part of community building that I wish I had known a year or two ago is knowing who will gather. So specifically, who's going to show up for this? Because in my experience, sometimes I have a vision of who I think will show up for a community, and it's very different who actually does show up. So staying with the yarn nerdery vein on that, I, for a year, ran a retail yarn shop with that same friend that I had the podcast with. And we ran a downtown location for a yarn shop that was super nerdy, admittedly, but we were really passionate about building a community in the physical shop. Like, we had a space where people could come and hang out, take classes, get help with projects, learn from each other, and form community. And in our minds, I think we had one idea of who would gather there, what type of person would be excited. And I personally, I don't know about my business partner, what her thoughts were on it, but I was blown away by the type of people that showed up. I kind of expected that there would be people who had a lot more free time, right? So people who were stay-at-home parents, which we did have those for sure. People who were retirees, we definitely had those too. That was kind of what I expected. We'd kind of have people who maybe weren't working full-time or had more time on their hands because they didn't have traditional employment or things like that, or were small business owners. We had a ton of those people too. But we also had people who were the type of people that I thought for sure wouldn't show up, right? People who worked a lot, people who were maybe passionate about fiber arts but were newer to it or weren't as involved in the craft, and maybe it was just a part of their passing hobbies. It wasn't like their only hobby. We had a ton of people who came out for events at the shop or just to like hang out and knit or crochet, people who were employed full time, and that really blew my mind. So the hours that we were most active, there was a huge range of people, and that affected how we then built out events in the future. What we kind of catered to. We knew that there were certain people that could come out during the daytime and certain people that couldn't. So in building our in-person community, we had to take into consideration that there were people who wanted to gather and be part of the community that had restrictions that we had to meet. Time restrictions, skill restrictions. We couldn't just be like, you can only come hang out if you're knitting a gigantic lace shawl. That's a very complicated project. We had people of all ranges, and the unifying factor, the why they gathered, was because of passion for the fiber arts and a desire to learn more. Didn't matter what stage they were at or what their lifestyle looked like. That was the unifying factor that built that community. So that's kind of like knowing the why and how that informs the who, and how that could surprise you potentially about who will gather in your community. So in building out online communities, this is something that I've done in a for fun way in the past, through forums or social media or whatever. Again, usually around a hobby or a passion or a local region, people who are in this city or doing this thing. That type of community is things that I have experienced building out. But building out a community that is fully online. Maybe we'll have some in-person events eventually, but it's built intentionally to be an online entity. That was something that was very new to me when doing it under the umbrella of for a brand and for a specific purpose within that brand, for internal motivations, right? So the brand that I've been working with and I'm incoming co-founder of is a collective of creatives that are located in the Midwest, but want to collaborate across disciplines and across the region. So what that online community looks like is very specific, and it has very specific needs, right? There needs to be certain functionalities for that online presence. It needs to be highly searchable. People need to be able to find each other, find other members so that they can collaborate. There needs to be options for online events, virtual events that people can join easily. You have to be able to record those events because people are in different time zones or have different things going on. So those are all considerations that when last year, this community is a year old, a couple weeks ago, when this community was being founded and I was helping with the original founder of it, like, who is now my co-founder, she had this vision for it, and we sat down and we talked about what the actual platform needs were, right? So we wanted it to be searchable. We wanted people to easily be able to connect with each other through private messaging, through group messaging, all these different features. And she already had a platform in mind because she had been part of a community on a platform that was hosted through this company. So me, not knowing anything about the platform, I jumped in, researched it, and I was like, wow, this really does check all the boxes. And it does have the ability to grow, right, with us as our needs grow and change. So look into the different platforms. This was something that was kind of mind-blowing to me last week in Memphis. I learned how many different options there are for platforms that I had no idea about. Like I said, in building that online community that I was talking about, the creatives of the Midwest, that one I came into with a platform kind of handed to me. So I was like, yeah, we're building it out on this. This is what we're doing. It fits. It checks all the boxes. Great. I didn't do a ton of research about other platforms because that was what we were doing. In Memphis, we got to meet we got to meet teams from a ton of different platforms that exist. Discourse, Participate, Khoros, Toucan Tech, Swapcard. Like, I'm trying to think, there were so many that were present there. The platform that we use for our community and I use for my biz club is Mighty Networks. And they were a sponsor of this event, but I was a little bummed they weren't there. I wanted to chat with staff from them, but oh well, they're busy, I guess. It was really awesome, though, to meet people from these other companies and hear about what their tech is. I mean, I'm a nerd, so like I'm into that. But getting to hear what their tech is, what their functionalities are, price points, things like that, and learning like, wow, there are these huge software companies that exist and have existed for years to build out communities for big brands. That was mind-blowing to me. So looking into your platform options and knowing what you need your community to do is going to help you choose where to build it. I never in a million years would consider building out a community on Slack, just because that is just not in my daily operating space. I don't use Slack. There are a lot of communities that exist there. If that fits your needs, that's awesome. But know what your needs are. Know what your members' needs are going to be. You know, how do they need to interact with each other? What behaviors do you want to encourage within your community? You know, do you want to encourage collaboration? You should have good ways for them to talk one-on-one to each other privately. Do you want to encourage sharing of media, of critique, of video, of whatever? You know, those behaviors that you want to have are going to inform what platform you build out. Similar to social media, you know, like if you are choosing what platforms to be present on for your brand, you're going to think about, okay, you know, where are my people at? What do they need from me? What type of content can I create? What platform fits all of those? The same for community building. And then deciding the nuts and bolts of this. This is something I have zero answers on. Which is super unhelpful, but it's something that I would have loved to more deeply pick an expert's brain about before starting building my own community. So with Bad Axe Biz Club, it's only a few months old. I started it in January of this year. I went into it not really sure what I wanted to achieve monetarily, right? There's free communities, there's paid communities, there's like a freemium model where it's kind of free, but then paid for certain features. I went into it kind of unsure of what to expect. I knew what I wanted to provide and what I wanted members to do, but I didn't know what part of it to monetize, right? Like, obviously, I'm putting time and effort into it. I want it to be a revenue stream for my brand. But I wasn't really sure when I started exactly how to build that out. And I started it one way with a certain membership cost, and almost immediately it felt wrong to me. So I changed it up. It was really, really quick that I was aware, you know, for myself, not like members were banging down my door yelling at me or something like that. But for myself, I felt like this doesn't align right. This doesn't fit what I'm trying to do. So discussing like monetization of the community and knowing what your end goals are for it, that for me in community building would have been really helpful to have somebody to talk to up front about it. And at the conference last week, I was able to talk to some people about that. And, it was pretty brief conversations. These were jam-packed days with tons of sessions and really, really great information. So any of the conversations I had with people about monetization and how do you build that out and what are your thoughts on it, they were pretty brief. And we couldn't really get into like the nuts and bolts of discussing community goals and functionality and things like that and discussing in depth what would make a difference as far as monetization goes. So I don't have a ton of insight on that, but if you are thinking of building out a community, seek out insight. There are a ton of professionals, resources out there that you can get at least some insight on what has worked for other people. The fifth thing that I wish I had thought about or put more effort into when starting out the community is how to empower members. And this is something that was discussed a lot last week at CLIX. And I found it very like mind-blowing. I really, really enjoyed learning about how big, like huge corporate communities with thousands and thousands of members, how they are empowering their members. And there's lots of different ways to do it. Like there's advocacy, right? So you take your members and if they're big advocates of the community, you give them the tools to advocate even better. There's, people who within the community are basically acting as volunteer moderators. How do you give them the tools to do that even better? So thinking about in advance, right? What kind of behaviors would you just love it if your members had, right? Inviting new people, referring people to the community, helping you problem solve, develop new products or services, or what behaviors are you like, wow, this would be amazing if somebody did XYZ, whatever. Think about those behaviors in advance and how you want to reward them. That was something that I'm still thinking about. I have so many I have so many pages and pages of notes about community and advocacy and championing your members and just loving on them and celebrating them and making them, reciprocating the love that they're feeling for you and for what you're building. So I have a lot of thoughts about that still, and I'm still figuring out what that looks like for my own community. And with Creatives of the Midwest, AMIDST, we're building that out too. We're working on a community advocacy and figuring out what that means for our members and what they would like to receive from that. So again, a part of the journey that I thought about a little bit in the beginning, but I wish I had spent a little more time considering, because now I'm getting to a point where I'm like, I need to know what I'm doing. And when you're in the day-to-day, you don't necessarily slow down and think about those big picture things. So those are things that I wish I had thought about in advance. And a bonus tip about building community and the success that I've already experienced with mine. I consider Bad Axe Biz Club to already be a really big success, even though I've pivoted twice since January. I've changed things that I've been doing twice since January, which is awesome. I feel like I've gotten such good feedback that I consider the community, though small and still startup, and I'm still learning, to be really successful. I think my secret sixth bonus tip for community building success or starting a community and what to consider would be providing value that blows people's minds. So whether you're free or paid, make the community a space to be where people feel seen, heard, and celebrated, and their needs are met, anticipated, exceeded. And when you kind of know those first two pieces, right, knowing the why for building the community and knowing the who is going to show up and what their needs are and what attracts them to the why, knowing those things are going to help inform what type of value to provide, right? So, if I'm making a new knitting community and I am saying that the value, the why of the community is we're going to help each other write new knitting patterns. But all that I'm sharing is about existing knitting patterns and nothing about tech editing or the math to do gauges or the nuts and bolts of the why that drew people to that community of like, let's learn to design patterns together. And all we're doing is talking about existing patterns and not even in an analytical way. That's going to be a value that is detracting from the why. So thinking about why people showed up in the community and what they want to get from it, and then just above and beyond, just going extra, which is, what I believe for social marketing anyways. Go and provide so much value that people are like, oh, wow, that's what I'm getting for free. What's the paid going to be like? What's it like to work with this person? So I hope that helps. There's going to be more videos in the future. This is a unexpected journey that I'm on. Learning about becoming a community builder and having those tools in my belt, along with all of the other sorts of social marketing tools. But I'd love to hear if you're building out a community or you've worked in one before, whether it's a hobby community, passion community, or something that's, monetized for business. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Drop one below. And until next time, stay Bad Axe.